On the Talkback Show, on the radio, or whatever audiovisual device you choose to use, welcome to the GBC podcast, where we talk about the Packers and our hometown of Green Bay. This is episode 42, created on February 15th, 2023. I'm John. I'm in Appleton, Wisconsin. Along with me, Jeff in Minnesota, Neil out on the East Coast. Say hello, gentlemen, and tell us what you're drinking.
Hi, everyone. I'm having a Cerebral Brewing Y'all Need Science double IPA and beautiful
Y'all
color.
do.
Well, tonight I broke out the Firestone Walker 2021 Vintage Parabola, an Imperial Stout aged in bourbon, rye, and wheated whiskey barrels. Enjoy.
You've covered almost all of the time that we have for the podcast just by explaining what that beer
Thanks,
is.
Jeff. This concludes the beer episode. I have a tequila sunrise for the evening. You can find us on YouTube and Twitter at Green Bay Chat and Facebook at the GBC Podcast, Green Bay Chat. The audio available on Spotify, searching for, you guessed it, Green Bay Chat. Well, what are we talking about tonight? It's the Super Bowl. Super Bowl 57 has come and gone, and that's what we have to talk about. We'll let you know what's going on with the offseason, for us anyway. And that's really all there is. The final score, 38-35. It was the Kansas City Chiefs beating the Philadelphia Eagles. That means that two of the three of us correctly guessed the winner of the game. All three of us had the over at 51 points. And two of the three of us had the prop bet of heads versus tails correct. I went with heads. You guys had tails. That's the important stuff. We'll look at some of the other prop bets in a bit. But the game,
But John, you missed the point that I got all three of those correct. So
did you really?
Yes.
Well, okay, we'll be hearing about that for the rest of the year. So, Neil, why don't you just tell us about the game in general then?
Congratulations to Andy Reid and the Kansas City Chiefs. Andy Reid played a non-Andy Reid game. He took what the Philadelphia Eagles gave him. He took the weaknesses of the Eagles and he took advantages. When we talked last week about preparation for the game, it was more than anything that Andy Reid is somebody who's going to put in the effort in preparation. And obviously it's not just Andy Reid, it's that entire Eric Bieniemy, that entire staff. But they looked at what the Eagles could do, where their strengths were, where their weaknesses were, and they developed a game plan that built on exactly what they needed to do to win. Andy Reid essentially did not call an Andy Reid game in this game. They had a game that was strong on offense, defense, and special teams. It was a complete performance. But more than anything, it was a rushing game that complemented Patrick Mahomes and allowed them to have dominance in this game, and especially to have dominance, more importantly, in that second half. And I think that that really points to how Andy Reid is a deep thinker as a football coach, and he is not going to fall into the dogma. He's got to do the same thing every time, despite some of his history in that regard. He called the game that the Kansas City Chiefs needed to have called in order to win that football game against a really good Philadelphia Eagles team.
But did you feel that way at halftime? It was 24-14 at halftime, and Kansas City didn't really feel that dominating. They had the defensive touchdown, which helped, but they just didn't feel like they were going to be in control of that game.
Yeah, well, they made adjustments at halftime. I think that's the thing that's true more than anything else. And there's an incredible difference between the first half statistics in this game and the second half statistics. I will get into that in just a moment.
So did having 29 minutes at halftime help as opposed to 12 minutes?
I think it helped because Patrick Mahomes' ankle was hurt, and giving him a little bit more time to have things shot into his ankle was going to make a difference. But, I think that globally, a team that is more experienced is going to be able to take advantage of that time more. So you take a team like the Eagles, where, yes, they had been in the Super Bowl not too many years ago, but not many players were still on that team. They did not have the same muscle memory of being in the Super Bowl. And I think that there's a component of the nerves being able to take more control for a less experienced team. But I don't think that's the major component. I just think that Kansas City and Andy Reid and the coaching staff adjusted at halftime to figure out what they needed to do to turn that game around.
Well, not every team, has a quarterback with the courage to take two Vicodin and rip a bottle of whiskey at halftime to cure a separated ankle, right, Jeff?
That is a true statement, Sean. So looking at the statistics, looking back, and get into the statistics, but watch the game. I had picked Philly. So I want to, just from that, selfish standpoint, I want him to win. In honesty, I didn't give a shit who won. But what we did get to see, fortunately, was a very entertaining game, which it was. It was a very close game, back and forth, lots of offense. So a couple thoughts on that. So remember we talked about the Buffalo snow game 3 weeks ago. This obviously this was in Arizona, but the surface was so crappy. It was similar to that in that I think advantage offense, right? Because there were 2 sacks in the whole game for 2 lost yards. One of the sacks was because Hurts ran out of bounds. I mean, it really wasn't a sack. So the defensive line, of which Phillies had a better defensive line, one could argue, they just could not get to Mahomes because everybody was slipping. Now, you saw obviously a lot of offensive players slipping and sliding around, but I think at the end of the day, it really made a big difference for the defensive line, and the fact that Mahomes, yes, he was quick passing, the running game, but I think everything worked in Kansas City's advantage. They had no turnovers. Andy Reid called a perfect game. I mean, there's a couple plays that I want to go back to some of those touchdown passes where the receivers were absolutely wide open. Why were they wide open? Because Kansas City schemed to do exactly the opposite of what Philly was supposed to do. Defensive backs were what they planned on them doing. They essentially went right into the trap. It was brilliant from that aspect. I mean, really, really well done. But again, Kansas City didn't have any turnovers. Now, they did have the missed field goal, the doink, of course, but that one turnover, the fumble, the return, that was basically the game. That, and you could argue the ass hats too for Philly. The longest punt return in history, which is weird, right? I mean, it was like, what? Those were the 2 definitive plays that did it. We won't talk about the refs, the holding called, whatever. I mean, because at the end of the day, that's what happened. And the game, they kicked the field goal and won. They saw to it, but they executed absolutely perfectly, Kansas City.
So related to that execution, though, Jeff, I don't think you're giving enough credit to the Kansas City offensive line. I mean, there was a lot of scheming that made their offense effective, but the fact is that Philadelphia had 70 sacks in the regular season compared to only 55 for the second best team, which, oh, by the way, was Kansas City. They had 70 sacks in the regular season. And a key element of that from a planning perspective was indeed the fact that Patrick Mahomes got the ball off really, really quickly, something like 2.7 seconds per play. And in the second half, it was under 2.4 seconds to release. Basically about as fast as anyone can get the ball out consistently. And so they had a plan that was in place, but it's not like, and Patrick Mahomes was only pressured on 7 plays in the entire game.
Amazing.
So you cannot, blame the field, I think, as far as slowing Philadelphia down. There may be a minor role for that, but the primary element of that was that the Kansas City offensive line just took control of the game.
Well, and they ran the ball really, really, really well. And that was kind of the X factor, right? We talked about that. Okay, they've got to run the ball, but they ran it to the tune of 6.1 yards per rush. I mean, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And I think that was also a big difference for the little, because Philly, almost every statistical category, as we've talked about, but they time of possession, first downs, pretty much everything they dominated. But Kansas City, it was quality versus quantity. Certainly, every single play that it was purposeful and obviously fruitful from a scoring standpoint.
Well, I mean, it was certainly a tale of 2 halves, though, as well, as far as the statistics were concerned. And I think you're right. The overall statistics, you look at the game, and yes, Philadelphia had more first downs. They had 11 conversions on third down versus 4 third down conversions for Kansas City, as well as 2 fourth down conversions, 72 plays to 53 plays, 417 yards to 340 yards.
Yeah.
and as you said, 36 to 24 minutes. It wasn't just a slight edge in time of possession.
No,
it was
huge.
a huge edge as far as time of possession considered over the entire game. And you look at Jalen Hurts, for example. I know John really wants to go on about Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts had Jalen Hurts, 304 yards passing, 8 yards per attempt with the touchdown pass, and then 15 rushes for 70 yards. So 374
and 3 touchdowns on the ground.
3 touchdowns rushing, Neil.
Yeah, I mean, so Jalen Hurts obviously had an amazing game, but the problem for Philadelphia was the offense was dependent essentially entirely on Jalen Hurts. And to me, the statistic that told the game for Philadelphia was Miles Sanders. Miles Sanders has had a great year as a running back. In the Super Bowl, he had 7 rushes for only 16 yards. The running backs overall for Philadelphia only had 17 rushes for 45 yards. Contrast that with Kansas City. Pacheco, 15 rushes, 76 yards, and a touchdown. McKinnon, 4 rushes, 34 yards. Overall, the running backs had 20 rushes for 114 yards. And you add in Patrick Mahomes' rushing yards. Kansas City had 165 rushing yards in that game. I will note that Patrick Mahomes only had 182 passing yards in the game. They almost had parity between passing yards and rushing yards in that game. That is not what you expect from Andy Reid. We talked last week about all the things that happen in Andy Reid losses in the playoffs. This was the exact opposite of what Andy Reid does when he loses in the playoffs. This was an incredible game plan. That is clearly a question of game planning that led to this balance as far as the game is concerned. They recognized that Philadelphia was the weakest against the run. They took advantage of that, but they were always moving things around to keep Philadelphia defense off balance.
It was about a 50-50 split runs and passes too, wasn't it, for Kansas City? I think they had like one more pass attempt.
Yeah, so 27 passing attempts for Mahomes, including Mahomes runs. Yes, 26 rushes for Kansas City. So yes, complete balance as far as the playmaking for Kansas City is concerned. But as I said, it was a tale of 2 halves, and those overall numbers don't tell the story of the game. So the first quarter, balanced 7-7 game. Mahomes and Hurts basically the same as far as passing, 73 versus 71 yards. Philadelphia had a slight edge as far as first downs. Kansas City actually had an edge in total yards in the first quarter, 112 to 99. But all year, Philadelphia has been a second quarter team. So coming into the Super Bowl, they were +5 in points in the first quarter, plus 116 points in the second quarter, plus 26 in the third quarter, and minus 14 in the fourth quarter. And Philadelphia turned on the afterburners in that second quarter. Mahomes only had 16 yards passing. They only had -3 yards rushing for non-Mahomes. First downs, 1 first down for Kansas City the entire second quarter to 9 for Philadelphia, 16 yards of offense for Kansas City in the second quarter to 171 yards of offense, over 10 times more yards of offense for Philadelphia in the second quarter than Kansas City. Philadelphia wins that quarter 17-7 and goes into halftime with a 24-14 lead. But of course, that defense is the only reason why it was even 24-14. And the Hurts fumble and the scoop return is what kept that game close. So looking into halftime, I was clearly cheering for Kansas City, living in the Philadelphia metro area, having my strong opinions about the Eagles, strong negative opinions about the Eagles. I was feeling very concerned at halftime as far as where this game was going. But those numbers that seem to be fairly random as far as points for Philadelphia by quarter, their second quarter team, second half came around and Kansas City just took control, and it didn't completely take control. If you look at the statistics in the third quarter, right, it was only a 7-3 game as far as in favor of Kansas City. In the third quarter, Mahomes actually only had 27 passing yards in the third quarter. Hurts actually had more yards passing in the third quarter, but Kansas City had 55 yards rushing in that quarter, leading to 55 yards rushing from the running back in that quarter. Yards in the third quarter, 106 for Kansas City to only 65 for Philadelphia. And then you get into the fourth quarter, Patrick Mahomes, 8 of 9, 2 touchdown passes, those 2 beautiful misdirection plays to lead to those touchdown passes. Juju Smith-Schuster, 40 yards receiving in that quarter. Jalen Hurts, in contrast, 5 of 7, 70 yards. The numbers actually of the quarterbacks, though, really aren't that different if you just look at the numbers. But of course, there's more than just what those quarterbacks did. And so if you look overall in the statistics of the game, in the first half, Mahomes, 8 of 13, 89 yards, 1 touchdown. Hurts, 17 of 22, 183 yards passing and a touchdown. Hurts also had 11 rushes, 63 yards, and 2 touchdowns in the first half. First downs in the first half, it was 6 for Kansas City to 17 for Philadelphia. But you look at those same numbers in the second half. First downs, Kansas City won the first down battle 15-8. Third downs, Kansas City was 4 of 5 in the second half, and that one that they didn't make, obviously they intentionally didn't make. And yards, 212 to 147 for Kansas City in that second half. Rushing yards in the second half, 126 for Kansas City to only 28 for Philadelphia. And Kansas City actually had the edge in time of possession in the second half. And globally, Patrick Mahomes, 13 of 14 with 2 touchdowns in the second half.
And you mentioned that it's a game of 2 halves, but I would even add to that, it's 2 halves and then the last 2 minutes of the game. And I think that's, when we look at this game, it is an epic battle as far as Super Bowl history goes. The teams are tied at 35 when the 2-minute warning rolls around. And from the fan perspective, any fan that, as Jeff, you said, if you didn't have a horse in the race, you're looking at this race saying, hey, this is pretty good. I like this. Mm-hmm. It's tied at 35. Kansas City is knocking at the door. And you're looking at this saying, well, they're going to at least get a field goal out of it. They might get a touchdown, but no matter what, there's going to be enough time that this is going to be an exciting ending where Philadelphia is going to have the ball. We're going to see how good Jalen Hurts is. We're going to see how well the defense plays. And it was lining up to just be a very exciting finish. And then you get a penalty. And then, as Neil mentioned, not scoring on a play where you were wide open, you don't score, and you allow the clock to run down. It becomes very anticlimactic. It is just, here we are watching, over a minute and a half wind down. Yep. It's like thinking, gosh, in baseball, they came up with a way to alleviate wasting time on intentional walks.
Speed up the game, yeah.
Can we just say, look, we know this much time is going to run off? But, there's the element of, anything could happen. They still had to snap the football, but from the fan perspective, it's just a matter of, okay, let's get this over with. And you get the field goal. And then when Philly does get the ball, probably the worst Hail Mary ever to end the game.
To be fair, right, given Harrison Butker's doink earlier in the game, that field goal didn't feel entirely as secure as somebody cheering for Kansas City as it might have been otherwise. I mean, obviously it was the right call to wind the clock down or allow the clock to go down and kick it such that Philadelphia had no time, but there certainly was an element of risk given what had happened earlier in the game.
Plus the slippery field too.
Yeah, right. And the slippery field was, what people were saying is it was especially on the painted areas. And guess what? That final field goal was right from one of those painted areas. So
yeah.
Overall on the game, though, some prop bets that you could have won. The over-under on the national anthem, 125 seconds. The under hit on that one. It was relatively short. As we mentioned earlier, tails, the winner on the coin toss. The first touchdown of the game went to Jalen Hurts of the Philadelphia Eagles. That field goal hitting the post, a doink, you could have bet on a doink on a field goal, and that one would have gotten you some dollars. A defensive touchdown. Last week we talked, when we were talking with Ryan, I asked him as the Philly fan who he thought the most likely pick six was going to be, and he was rooting, for Darius Slay pick six. It ends up being Nick Bolton on a fumble six, and the Chiefs defense scores a touchdown there. The over, as we mentioned, 51.5, and the Gatorade color. Did you guys catch the Gatorade at the end of the game? What color won?
We're allergic to that color, John, so just say it.
Yeah, right? It was purple. Purple was the Gatorade color.
Grape.
Why purple? I don't know. Yeah, grape must be. So apparently Kansas City players enjoy grape Gatorade. So those were some of the prop bets, but the big one that matters, the big award of the game, not only winning it, but it's the most valuable player. Neil, you threw all those stats out there. You like Patrick Mahomes in that role.
The efficiency of Kansas City offense in the second half was incredible, right? just going back to the statistics, they only even got to 5 third downs. And again, if they hadn't been screwing around at the end, they'd have only made it to 4 third downs in the entire second half. There was an incredible level of efficiency in that offense, and leading that level of efficiency is certainly MVP worthy. He was the person, and it was not just him, Patrick Mahomes, throwing the ball. His runs were really critical when it mattered too. So specifically in the second half, Patrick Mahomes did have 40 yards rushing if you exclude the kneel down. So field general component is real. And yes, Jalen Hurts put up a lot of gaudy statistics, but winning matters, and doing the things in the second half matters more than the first half. The things that are necessary to win the game matter the most. And the other thing, looking at Jalen Hurts, of course, he did have that fumble 6, and you can't count all of his scoring and then not take into account the fact that he gave up that touchdown as well.
Well, to me, the most valuable player of the game is the person who is the most valuable player of the game, not of the second half. And you talk about having that winning factor, and you're right. I think that historically we've always the MVP has to come from the winning team. There's only been one time in Super Bowl history, Super Bowl 5, Chuck Howley of the Dallas Cowboys. Now Baltimore beat Dallas 16-13. That was an ugly offensive game. There were 6 interceptions thrown in total in that game, but Chuck Howley had 2 of those picks, which was a record at the time. And as a defensive player from the losing team, he ends up winning the most valuable player award of that game. So there's precedence there for letting someone from the losing team. And Neil, you mentioned the gaudy statistics. Jalen Hurts had a great game. You take that one play out, and it is a fantastic game. And you do take that one play out, and it probably is a win for the Philadelphia Eagles as well.
That's where we debate that, but yeah, I mean that was a huge change. And then, as I mentioned before, the asshats, right? Yeah. The line drive kick. In theory, Kansas City is going to be backed up. They're going to take a bunch of time up, if they have to drive or whatever. And the longest punt return in Super Bowl history. And suddenly they're on the goal. It's 1st and goal. And I think that's when, at least for me, that was kind of like, okay, Kansas City is just, I don't want to call it swag or whatever, where it just seemed like, okay, they're really in control here. And Philly kept it together, again, for basically a rookie coach in the Super Bowl. You didn't see players lose their shit. You didn't see stupid penalties. You didn't see, from all these things, these two teams were so evenly matched. That's why, from a back and forth, from just the way the game is supposed to be played kind of thing, from the really good execution, from, and I think we talked about it last week too, that like one play is going to decide it probably. And that's ultimately, what happened was the turnover, because it was so closely matched and so well played. But like I said, no dumb penalties, no personal fouls, nothing of the sort. 2 very, very well coached, disciplined, and really well executing teams. So, clearly these 2 teams deserve to be there. And like I said, felt a little gypped at the end. Yeah, totally. I mean, I would have liked to have seen Philly, get it back with a minute and a half left and see what happens, whether they need to score a field goal to tie it, touchdown, we go into overtime. That's what I really wanted to see as a fan. Didn't happen, just go.
You still get your money's worth.
Oh, totally.
It was an incredible game overall. And the other thing I'd say about Patrick Mahomes' statistics, right? So he only had 182 yards passing, but by the same token, if they don't have that 60-yard punt return in the second half, do you really think that Patrick Mahomes was going to be stopped in that second half? There was nothing Philadelphia was doing that was going to stop Kansas City in that second half. And similarly, the second quarter statistics that are so dominant for Philadelphia are dominant in part because, well, that's also when the fumble 6 occurred. And while that takes the ball out of Kansas City's hands. So, I mean, the play of the defense and the play of the special teams actually impacted what the numbers were for Patrick Mahomes and make his contribution seem a little bit less than you might have guessed otherwise. And I will say that I've said this before, I'm a fan of ESPN's QBR rating. So it's a rating between 0 and 100 that's much more complex than the traditional quarterback rating that goes to 158.3. Patrick Mahomes had a 96.4 QBR in that game.
Is that
Essentially,
good, Neil?
almost a perfect game for a quarterback. Hurts was great. So 50 is sort of like an average quarterback. And Hurts was 79.7. Hurts had a great game. There's no doubt about it. Jalen Hurts has impressed me all year. He impressed me in the Super Bowl on Sunday, but Patrick Mahomes was just better enough. The Chiefs were better enough. They had a better enough game plan that they did what was necessary in order to win. And again, I do think that the game planning is a really critical component to it. Looking at the Philadelphia Eagles, they were 24th all year in yards gained per run allowed. So essentially their defense was allowing a lot of yards per run. Kansas City took advantage of that in their game planning. And then, of course, they had those 70 sacks. Mahomes, under pressure since 2018, only has a 15% sack rate, number one in the NFL over that time. They built their offense based on taking advantage of the strengths of Patrick Mahomes and taking away the strengths of the Philadelphia Eagles. Just a brilliant game plan by Kansas City.
Well, I get a kick out of Neil, of all people, just touting the accolades of quarterbacks here, back and forth on both quarterbacks. Neil, Nick Bolton is a middle linebacker who had a great game. He had the fumble 6. He led all tacklers with 9, 8 solo and an assist. He was all over that field. He kept Kansas City in that game. And if we're not going to look at the losing team quarterback as MVP, why are we not looking at a defensive player as MVP? Because as you keep throwing those Mahomes statistics out there, it's not that impressive. And
John, you realize that Philadelphia scored 35 points, right? It's kind of hard to speak the accolades of the defense when a team scores 35 points.
Yeah, but you have
offensive,
a
35
touchdown.
Offensive points.
Right.
Yeah, you have a defensive touchdown and a guy who, like I said, is all over the field there for Kansas City. Nonetheless, Mahomes wins the most valuable player award, and Kansas City wins the game.
So 2 other things that I want to note as far as the game is concerned from a statistical perspective. In the first half, Travis Kelce was absolutely dominant. He was sort of doing the things that Kansas City's offense needed to do. He now is at 9 straight playoff games with 75 or more yards. An incredible streak for any player, but especially for a tight end. And then finally, looking at accolades for the quarterback, for Patrick Mahomes, there have been 8 quarterbacks to have led the NFL in touchdown passes and win the Super Bowl in the same season. Ken Stabler in 76, Terry Bradshaw in 78, Steve Young in 94, Brett Favre in 96, Kurt Warner in 99, Peyton Manning in 06, Drew Brees in 09, and Patrick Mahomes now. So, this is somebody who was dominant all year and was dominant when the game mattered most in the Super Bowl.
Talk about Andy Reid, Neil, because you talked so much about Andy Reid last week. Is this something that cements a Hall of Fame career for Andy Reid? Is this a lock for Canton for him?
I think it is. I mean, he's got the second most playoff wins of all time. He's got 2 Super Bowl victories. I don't think there's any argument that can be made at this point of him not deserving a Hall of Fame gold jacket.
When do Bill Belichick and Andy Reid get trophies named after them the way that Lombardi has? Are there any other trophies out there that they can name them after?
They could rename the AFC Championship trophy at some point. It'll probably have Belichick's name on it. I don't think Andy Reid is, because he's been, with Philadelphia for so long. I mean, he has been to 4 Super Bowls. So yeah, I think he will definitely be a Hall of Fame coach, certainly. But I don't think he's going to have a trophy named after him.
Fair question.
Maybe a street, but not a trophy.
All right, Jeff did not get a wardrobe malfunction at halftime, but he probably has a list of favorite commercials. Jeff, what did you like about the entertainment throughout the Super Bowl?
So, commercials.
Jeff, I really like that throat clearing just to start things off. Let's put ourselves right into the full John mode here.
Thank you very much. The commercials are always a mix of the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? There was some, when as we're watching it, kind of like, what the hell was that? Or please don't ever show that again. Or Dave Grohl should be in all commercials. So my favorite commercial was the Crown Royal Thank You Canada commercial. I've watched that a bunch of other times since then on YouTube. I'm just like, oh my God, it's just, I don't know. That was my favorite. I was digging that from a number of perspectives. The Workday Rockstar, that wasn't bad either. with Kiss
Well, with
and
Paul Stanley in full makeup helped out
yeah, well, of
immensely.
course,
Yes.
but that it's funny because that being in the corporate world and to hear that occasionally, it's like, oh Jesus Christ, seriously, you're not a fucking rock star, right? So that's why from that perspective, that was damn funny. I mean,
Yeah.
that was just clever. And then right at the end, where the guy's about to say it, and then Paul Stanley comes in the room and like gives him the
Mhm.
hairy eyeball. I wasn't going to say it. That was good stuff. Full disclosure, I've never seen a full episode of Breaking Bad, but because it's kind of a pop culture kind of touchstone, the Pop Corners Breaking Bad commercial with Bryan Cranston, that was pretty funny as well. So it was that was enjoyable. Lots and lots of kind of Gen X 80s references as well,
Yeah.
right?
That first Caddyshack commercial I thought was beautiful, and
Especially with Danny Noonan in the actual
Mhm.
commercial, right? I mean, that was good stuff. Tony Romo is Carl Spackler. It's like, okay. The other one actually that they played during the Super Bowl, which I had seen previously, actually I think it was on Twitter or something, was the Bush commercial with Sarah McLachlan. That I thought that was pretty good too. With the guy like talks about shelter, and then she launches in with her old,
Yeah.
ASPCA, shelter for animals. And he's like, wrong shelter, Sarah. And that's a wolf. So that was kind of clever too. And the fact that, they actually had Sarah McLachlan in the commercial. That was kind of amusing as well. And there was, as I recall, so last year there were a number of singing animals, which I kind of dig for whatever reason. And I think there was only one singing animal this year. So
But we
I
had a
kind of
actually two talking babies. Technically, the Ameritrade baby came back. I didn't think the Ameritrade baby commercial this year was good as last year's, where he made the comeback. But then you had a second talking
the wedding.
baby for U2 in their Octung Live residency in Las Vegas. That one was kind of interesting. A couple of good movie commercials or movie trailers that aired during this. When you look at the cost of a spot for the commercials during the Super Bowl, so these blockbuster movies, that's where the money is.
It's a rounding error.
They're
Yeah.
the ones who can afford a 1 to 2 minute spot there. So you get,
Yep.
Harrison Ford coming back for another Indiana Jones movie,
Yep.
and they're able to do, through CGI and other special effects to make him younger for certain scenes and things like that. So I think that's very exciting. But I was very pumped for not the Flash movie because of Flash, but this concept of the multiverse or multi-universe that they're putting together. And Michael Keaton shows up as Batman. And that for
Mm.
me was my favorite commercial of all of them.
I was
All right.
amazed that Cocaine Bear wasn't just some sort of Twitter meme, and that this is actually a real thing.
It's like Violent Night. Yeah, Violent Night. They came
Right.
out
And
in
I was like,
December with David
wait,
Harbour.
what?
Is
That's a
this a joke?
thing?
No, it's a
Yeah.
real movie. Yeah, Cocaine Bear is
Yeah,
a real movie as well.
that was disturbing, but I'm like, I'll just that I won't be seeing that one, but certainly I'm going to see Indiana Jones. I will definitely.
All right.
I was excited about that one. You got to love that. But overall, I think a good group of commercials. The other one that wasn't, I guess it was technically a commercial, but it wasn't, the one right after halftime that advertised the ladies flag football.
Oh yeah.
That one, Billie Jean King had Mr. Beast in there. Yes, I have a teenage son, so that's why I know who Mr. Beast is. And then Jim Kelly was in there, and of course Devontae Adams.
Yep.
Oh hell no! So that was pretty clever as well. I did enjoy that one. It's like what's kind of initially, where's this going to go, or what's happening here?
Yeah.
But no, that was pretty amusing as well.
The final score, once again, Kansas City Chiefs 38, Philadelphia Eagles 35. Kansas City wins another Super Bowl trophy, the Vince Lombardi Trophy, going to Kansas City, winners of Super Bowl 57. They joined the three-timers club, or at least the 3+ timers, teams that have won the Super Bowl 3 times now with Kansas City in that club. Also in that club, the Denver Broncos, San Francisco 49ers, Dallas Cowboys, New York Giants, Pittsburgh Steelers, Oakland Raiders, New England Patriots, the Washington football team, and your Green Bay Packers. All right. With that said, though, not all of those teams have won back-to-back Super Bowls. That's an extra special feat, Jeff, and he's going to tell us about it with a little history lesson.
That's right. So with Kansas City winning, and now there's talk of dynasty, and how good, how many Super Bowls can Patrick Mahomes win, etc. So I said, okay, is this a dynasty in the making? Well, so they've been to the Super Bowl now a couple times, under Patrick Mahomes. They've got one win, but it's really, really hard to win back-to-back Super Bowls. So it's happened a total of 8 times with 7 different franchises. They are as follows. So obviously, the Packers started it out, right? 1-2. They got the ball rolling. They won in 66 and 67, Super Bowls 1 and 2. And overall, Green Bay has won 4 total Super Bowls. So then along come the Dolphins in 72 and 73, Super Bowls 7 and 8, back to back. Now, interesting, and this is the only team on this list, those are the only 2 Super Bowls that they've ever won. So it's been a while. Obviously, they've been back with Marino, didn't win. So 2 total Super Bowl wins for the Dolphins. Then we come to a true dynasty, the Pittsburgh Steelers. They've won 6 Super Bowls. So they were the team of the 70s, right? They were good. They had 2 back-to-back Super Bowls, 74, 75, Super Bowls 9 and 10, and then again in 78 and 79, Super Bowls 13 and 14. So again, it's happened 8 times, 7 franchises. They're the only franchise to have done it twice. Then we go next to the San Francisco 49ers. They've won 5 Super Bowl titles, and their back-to-back years were in 88 and 89. That was Super Bowls 23 and 24. Then, thanks in large part to the Minnesota Vikings, come the Dallas Cowboys in the early 90s. So we got Dallas has a total of 5 Super Bowl wins. And with the last 2 coming in 92 and 93, that were their back-to-back years, Super Bowls 27 and 28. And then we move to Denver. They only have, so as John mentioned, they're in the 3-timers club. So 2 of their 3 wins were back-to-back in 97 and 98. Super Bowls 32 and 33. And then finally, the last team to do it were those pesky New England Patriots. So they stand at 6 total Super Bowls at the top of the heap, along with Pittsburgh. So, but it's 2003, 2004 was the last time there was a repeat winner, Super Bowls 38 and 39. So it's been 20 years. So if KC can get back and repeat, it will have been exactly 20 years. So we'll see. Maybe, and kind of segueing into the next section here, it doesn't appear that a lot of their coaches are going anywhere unless Andy Reid decides to walk away. Whereas Philly has lost a bunch of their coaches already to other teams. It seems that Kansas City has once again avoided, I don't know what you want to call it, but hasn't lost a lot of coaching talent. I wonder why.
Although there is talk about Eric Bieniemy, if he's not hired as a head coach, moving to a lateral position where he's able to call plays as an offensive
that totally makes sense.
So, going to this question about ability to repeat, there are 2 things that sort of one sort of favors Kansas City being able to repeat, one statistic that opposes Kansas City's ability to repeat. And so the 2022 Kansas City Chiefs were the first team in NFL history to lead in the 4th quarter in 20 different football games. Even in losses, they won. They had leads in the 4th quarter. There are 2 other teams. Obviously, they had the beneficiary of the 17-game schedule and then the playoffs. But fundamentally, every single game this year, Kansas City had a lead in the 4th quarter. That says something about how good they are as a football team. The only other 2 teams to reach that level of dominance were the 1984 San Francisco 49ers and the 2013 Seattle Seahawks, both of whom had a lead in 19 different games in the 4th quarter. On the other hand, Kansas City set a different mark as far as achievements as a football team, and that Patrick Mahomes took up 17% of the cap room for the Kansas City Chiefs this year. That was the highest cap percentage in the cap era, single player in the or in the salary cap era. So Steve Young in 1994 took up 13% of the cap space for San Francisco. That was previously the high for how much one single player could be dominating the cap space. Patrick Mahomes again at 17%, so way ahead of Steve Young's 13%. And you could see with Kansas City, they definitely did not have the depth. You look at the wide receiver core most notably, but other places, it's difficult to build a dominant football team that is good in all phases of the game when you've got one player who is taking that much of the salary cap. And it's certainly noteworthy that Jalen Hurts is still on his rookie contract, and that has been a major contributor to all of the things that Philadelphia was able to do in order to have such a good overall football team in all phases of the game. And they're going to lose players in this offseason, in part because they've got to pay Jalen Hurts.
That's super important, obviously. And that's what the trick is, right? With the salary cap, when you have to pay players, that it becomes really, really hard to surround them with talent. And that's why repeating has been so difficult. Because, if you look back at the New England Patriots, that's when Tom Brady was still on his rookie contract, I believe, those couple years. So, and a lot of, even those Cowboys and things like, these are teams that were kind of, they were kind of up and coming, and they had really good players, but they weren't at the top of their pay grade. One could argue, and Pittsburgh is clearly the outlier. They were just good. I mean, that was the
right, but
that's
that's pre-salary cap era, right? So it's entirely different as far as building a team pre-salary cap era versus building it in the salary cap era.
Yeah, and that's why I think you're seeing it's not happening as much, because it is so difficult, and with free agency and things like that as well. Yeah, it's very, very difficult to maintain that core of good players and pay them.
So the one thing that Philadelphia has in their favor, of course, is that they are still in the NFC, unlike Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. And I think that Jalen Hurts certainly has proven himself this year as being a really, really good quarterback. And in the context of all of the shit that is present within the NFC, as far as the quarterbacking, as far as the teams are concerned, I think Philadelphia has the best chance of returning to the Super Bowl of these two teams, whereas Kansas City is going to have to again beat Buffalo. They're going to have to beat Cincinnati. They're going to have to beat whoever else comes out of, just looking at the AFC West.
Jacksonville,
right?
Maybe.
Yeah, Jacksonville. Trevor Lawrence is certainly impressive. Yeah. And still on a rookie contract. And so, yeah, it's just more difficult to come out of the AFC. He's going to have to do it with a weaker talent pool than other teams are going to have. And so I certainly have high faith in Patrick Mahomes. I think that he is looking to be in that direction of Joe Montana's being in the potential of being in the discussion of the greatest of all time. And I am certainly in the Joe Montana, not Tom Brady as the greatest quarterback of all time. Patrick Mahomes is on that trajectory, but he's going to have to be able to do it with teams that don't have the same overall level of talent that other teams are going to have.
Bottom line from your report, though, Jeff, I mean, getting to the Super Bowl is difficult enough as it is. Then winning is even harder. And winning back to back, even getting there 2 years in a row and not winning, or winning one and not winning the next one, doesn't happen as often, save for, Buffalo getting there 4 years in a row. That's an incredible feat to get to the Super Bowl 4 years in a row, even though they don't win any of them. That's probably a record that's going to stand for a long time. Getting to the Super Bowl is very difficult. You talk about that. Yeah. The salary cap era. And we have our salary cap issues here in Green Bay. So that's something for the offseason. We will talk about that as it comes up. We're not going to do a lot of speculating there. Now, we're not going to go into total darkness for days or weeks or things like that. But we may take a little bit of time off, and we'll wait and see what happens coming up. Are we going to get
Neil just went into darkness there?
Yeah, Neil tried to go into darkness.
I didn't go to enough darkness. I've got my overhead lights on still, but
visual aid there.
Are we going to get a ridiculous offer from the New York Jets or the Las Vegas Raiders for our quarterback? We'll wait and see. We've got a draft coming up, so we might actually have to learn some players' names here as who might get drafted. We'll have another.
No, we don't, John. No, we don't, John. I need to know the players when they're actually on the Packers team. I don't need to know them anytime before then.
We will do our second annual draft special where we draw out of a hat and make our picks that way, because you have just as much success going that way as you do any other route, right?
And we were so awful. Yeah, exactly. So no, that's yeah. Look forward to that. We've also talked about the three of us, or the out of staters coming back for kind of a field trip on the Packer Heritage Trail, and kind of some coverage of that. And then of course, from perhaps long overdue at this point, is a recap also of our road trip last
Yeah.
summer as well. So
We'll get it out
to
there in time
Canada.
for anybody looking to do a road trip this summer, correct?
Absolutely.
That's right. So I think we've got lots of content coming up. It will be not every week, as you've stated, but I'm looking forward to kind of taking different directions, and maybe having some new guests on as well. Maybe we can reach out to some old guests as well and kind of reestablish those ties and get some of their thoughts on the season, both past and upcoming as well.
Finding guests is the fun part. Just throwing the feelers out there. It's like fishing, Neil. Seeing what
I honestly think that's John's favorite part of the podcast is finding guests.
Totally. So. Oh, I absolutely agree. Yeah.
We had a few that bailed on us throughout the year, and that's okay too. They changed their mind, and that's all right. We have dozens of viewers that may be upset about that, but we get some good guests. Ryan was good. Charles in Kansas City, and our friends that we made in Buffalo, by far and away. Finding another podcast of three guys who are effectively doing the same thing that we're doing or have been doing.
What are the odds?
I look forward to finding some more fans and podcasters out there like that next year. But like I said, we'll take some time off here. We may not be back every week, but we'll let our fans know through our social media where they can find us, when they can find us. Any other final thoughts before we wrap this one up?
It's been another interesting year, unfortunately, for Packers and Packer fans. Once again, a little bit came up short, but unlike Aaron Rodgers, we are not going to go dark. But there'll obviously be some Aaron Rodgers talk, and we'll see where that comes out. Who's QB1 in Green Bay next year. I'm sure we all have our opinions on that, and I don't know. Looking forward to a good, fun off season and getting out of winter finally, hopefully soon here in Minnesota.
So I enjoyed a really fun Super Bowl. It was, the fact that it was back and forth, that it wasn't just one team dominating throughout, that each team had their moments as far as starring in the game. We saw the best of what the NFL does in that Super Bowl. And in the end, seeing Patrick Mahomes, seeing Andy Reid carrying the Vince Lombardi trophy was a good way for the football season. And if it's not going to be the Packers, there's a pretty good consolation prize as far as the winners are concerned.
And if you're watching us on YouTube, please hit subscribe. That's the easiest way to find out if a new episode drops. You'll get a little icon that shows up when you go into YouTube. You can always leave a comment for us. Also, follow us on social media. You can find the GBC podcast at Green Bay Chat. That's all one word, Green Bay Chat. We are on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, and Facebook, the GBC podcast, Green Bay Chat. And may you fully appreciate the magnitude of your impending good fortune. Thanks for joining us.
Good night.
Good night.